If you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. Nelson Mandela. I'm here today to make my argument that one of the toughest foreign policy crises which hasn't been solved over the past 100 years actually could be solved. I'm talking about peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I think it is in fact possible, and today I am going to explain to you how we can achieve this. First, let's take a look at just how complicated the situation truly is. Jews believe that the land of Israel was given to them by God, as outlined in the Bible. As a practical matter, until 150 or so years ago, almost no Jews had lived there for many centuries. But also, it wasn't Palestine. Rather, it was a territory run by the Ottoman Empire as a distant outpost. In the late 19th century, a political movement developed advocating a Jewish state in Palestine. And small groups of European Jews, who often lived under terrible persecution, began moving there. It became more serious when the British government, at that time the world's most important power, issued the so-called Balfour Declaration, a letter from the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, in 1917, stating, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country." At that point, the Palestinian residents of Palestine believed their way of life was under threat. And as more Jews arrived, there were several decades of violent clashes. After World War II, tens of thousands of Jewish Holocaust victims attempted to enter Palestine. At that point, run by the British, and were turned away. World opinion became increasingly supportive of a Jewish state as a moral imperative after 6 million were murdered in the war. Palestinians make the argument that the Holocaust was a European atrocity and should have been addressed within Europe. In 1947, the United Nations voted for a complex partition plan that created separate Jewish and Palestinian states. In 1948, when the Jewish state was declared, the surrounding Arab countries invaded Israel. By some accounts, Israel also expelled tens of thousands of Palestinians. In another war, in 1967, Israel captured the West Bank and Gaza, the most heavily Palestinian regions, and began the occupation. That period also saw the rise of the PLO, that became the first global terrorist organization, killing thousands, arguing it was the only way to draw attention to their cause. Israel found itself divided between nationalists, who believed Israel had a historic right to the occupied territories, and pragmatists, who were happy to negotiate in theory, but wouldn't with men with blood on their hands, and who only seemed interested in a violent resolution. To Palestinians, on a day-to-day basis, they find themselves living under an occupation that negatively impacts every aspect of their lives. Violence is never a positive solution under any circumstance, and as you're probably all thinking right about now, how can we all possibly get this resolved? Well, let's take a look at a similar situation of a country with a similar conflict that isn't 100 or even 200 years old, but started at least 400 years ago. But a few years ago, we were able to negotiate a peace treaty after a long, gruesome battle. Ireland, a country with almost 1,000 years of conquering and occupation, and at its core, a conflict between Protestants and Catholics. In 1921, similar to Israel and Palestine, Ireland was divided, an independent Catholic republic in the south, while the north remained under British rule, where the majority were of the Protestant religion and wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom. But the Catholics in Northern Ireland wanted to become part of the Republic of Ireland. The IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was created by Catholic Republicans with the sole purpose of expelling the British out of Northern Ireland and to reunite with the Republic of Ireland. On the Protestant side, a range of similar paramilitary organizations. In 1973, violence exploded, with terrorist attacks across Northern Ireland, a brutal British military occupation, deep and bitter hatreds between each side, with almost 4,000 civilians killed. Most politicians and diplomats saw this as one of the toughest political situations a country has ever faced, a civil war between two religions which split in half one country. The Irish Liberation Army planted bombs in cars, pubs, and throughout public property, killing and injuring thousands of their people. However, in the 1990s, the Bill Clinton administration decided something had to be done and worked to bring together both sides. Most importantly, the leaders of the Catholic and Protestant terror organizations, Ian Paisley and Gary Adams, the Irish equivalent of Yasser Arafat. After many years of work, they came to an agreement. Both would now share the responsibilities of executive power with one another from this point onwards. And most importantly, they not only became partners, but close personal friends. When Paisley died a few years ago, Gary Adams and other leaders of the IRA led the mourning for him. Now, who would have thought a country filled with such destruction and violent hate would be able to put together something so positive, all because of determination and passion? In many ways, the Ireland situation may have been tougher to solve in comparison to the Israel and Palestine. So why can't they make peace? The argument that it's so tough and the parties too far apart clearly doesn't work. It's rare, but as we can see, clearly it's possible. Do you see my point here? There's now a successful path already paved out for us, one that can guide us in the right direction to achieve a brighter future for the people of both Israel and Palestine. The first step has to be stopping the violence and destruction between each side, starting with a civilized form of communication between the leaders. President Barack Obama has said, "Nothing in life that's worth anything is easy." He's right. Work hard and focus on the prize. You'll eventually achieve what you've been fighting for. If we were able to conquer hate in Northern Ireland by turning it into a peaceful and civil country, we can clearly create peace in other places around the world. One country at a time, and that time is now, with Israel and Palestine, by finding a middle ground that will satisfy both sides of the conflict so we can put this long-term violent war to an end.